we have a guest with us today. We have Rachel Curry, who's observing at the council, I think, for a week or a fortnight, and she's with us today just to see what we do at this meeting. So if we just directly go for apologies for absence, please, Morgan.
Yes, Chair, we have apologies for absence from Councillor Ben Thompson, as well as Councillor Bruce, though I don't have him as a member of this working group, but I did receive his apologies.
Okay, thank you. Declarations of interest.
Chair, I also received a declaration of interest from Councillor Rixon, and this is for items 4 through 7 as the council's representative to the Lochaber Environmental Group. But having applied the test outlined in paragraph 5.2 and 5.3 of the Councillor's Code of Conduct, he's concluded that his interest did not preclude his involvement in the discussion, so he will remain and take part.
That's fine, thank you, Morgan. Has anybody else got a declaration of interest that they maybe haven't put forward early? I don't see any hands up, so that's fine. So we'll turn to the minutes of the previous meeting. Anybody get anything they want to bring up on the minutes of the previous meeting? No, so we can approve the minutes then. Agreed. Thank you. Okay, so item 4, the Climate Change Programme Alignment Report. And we're to discuss and note the contents of this report and support the arrangement of a member workshop to present the outcomes of the Programme Alignment Report. Discuss options for the setting of a corporate net zero target date and then seek approval for a net zero target date at full council. And this is something that we really want to get ahead with early, members, so I hope you'll all make yourself very well available for this, and we'll obviously have to encourage our other members to do so. And this is what Martin is going to give us a good presentation on this Climate Change Programme Alignment Report.
Apologies, Chair. It's the food growing strategy, Highland Good Food Partnership, that Martin's here to take. So we're taking item 5 first. Okay, sorry. Well, we'll skip that all that I've just said then, members, and we'll go on to item 5. Apologies for that. Highland Good Food Conference, an update on food growing strategy. And Martin's doing this, but Emma Whittam is also here to answer questions on this. So we'll go ahead on, Martin, if you can tell us about food competence and the food growing strategy, please. We'll get this right maybe this time. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much for that. You had me worried for a moment. No, thanks very much for this invitation to explain a bit about what we've been doing at the Highland Good Food Partnership. And hopefully most of you will be familiar to some extent with the Highland Good Food Conference, which we ran earlier this year. And I'd like to use this slot to explain some of the things that have emerged since the conference, and hopefully stimulate some discussion about how the council can make the most of its continuing support for the project. And I know some of you attended the conference, and I'm sure some of you will have seen the conference report. And be aware of the emphasis that we made on action outcomes, and of the 11 project groups that reported at the end of the conference. So I'm not going to spend time explaining how that all went, but if anybody has any questions about that, then I'm very happy to pick them up at the end. But instead, what I'd like to do is to update you on two of these 11 projects. And also to give you a very quick idea of some of the things that are emerging in the structure of the partnership. And I've got one thing that I'd like to ask the council to consider doing. So first of all, there's a project that emerged from the conference that really seems to have caught the imagination, which is how could we grow our own Mediterranean vegetables in the Highlands? We know that in the parts of Southern Europe, which produce most of this at the moment, are threatened with climate-related water shortages. And it turns out that in Finland, for example, there's a thriving controlled environmental agriculture sector with 250 hectares of greenhouses growing produce, compared with 3 hectares in Scotland. So our working group that's investigating this has made a funding proposal to the Scottish Agricultural Organisation Society for a member of staff and expenses to develop a business plan for a new carbon zero environmentally friendly agricultural sector in the Highlands, combining large-scale greenhouses of a hectare or more with a network of smaller community-scale ones. So this is all really exciting, but it seems to me there's some quite striking elements of the group's proposal that are at the heart of the Highland Good Food Partnership ethos. And I see that Helen's just joined as well as one of our other trustees. So the things that strike me from this are that the working group itself includes a really wide range of people. There's crofters, farmers, there's a community growing initiative, there's the former owner of Lagan Stores, there's the chief executive of a housing construction company, and there's the chair of Scotland Food and Drink. And one of the striking things that we found throughout this process is that by bringing people from different backgrounds together, we find better solutions because the solutions benefit all sectors. And we also find that contributions and very constructive contributions and very worthwhile contributions sometimes come from sectors that you really don't expect. The second thing I'd like to just stress about this project, it sounds like an economic development project, but it's much more holistic than that. It's also about improving the Highland diet, it's about addressing climate change, and it's about increasing skills and the university sector in the Highlands. And the third thing is that, like pretty much everything that we're trying to do, it's really action driven. We need to see things changing. And although there needs to be some discussion to make that happen, discussion on its own clearly isn't enough. So the second project I wanted to just talk about is at a much earlier stage of development, but possibly a bit more closer to the sort of the interests of Highland Council, or directly so anyway. That's a group from the conference that's looking at the circular economy in food. And they've identified food waste as a specific concern. Now, 14% of food and drink taken home is discarded. And in the Highlands, most of that ends up in landfill, which is a huge problem for the council and getting to be a bigger problem as restrictions on landfill are tightened. So our suggestion is to work with communities where there's already an interest in food and the environment, to encourage them to reduce food waste from homes and also from hospitality businesses, and to process what's left locally in small-scale digesters. This will reduce the greenhouse emissions associated both with growing the food that isn't used and also with disposing of the waste. It will have educational benefits from involving schools and the food waste from schools and demonstrating to kids the impact of that. It'll have benefits in that the compost that's produced can be used by community growing initiatives. It'll enhance the reputation of Highland tourism as environmentally responsible because food waste will be appropriately disposed of. And it will reduce the council's waste disposal programme. So it seems to us that if you put all that together, there's potential to change the attitude to food waste completely, away from it being a problem for the council to it being something that we all need to deal with, and we need to make the best possible use of it. So I see that as very much another example of the benefits of breaking out of silo thinking and bringing people together from a range of different backgrounds, and also a demonstration of the way the food sector is relevant to absolutely all aspects of our lives. And it's an area where we can't see progress without both local and national government taking a more holistic approach to what goes on. So finally, another sort of interesting thing to do with our own structure. So we aim to form a sustainable food place, which has capital letters, it's a thing. And Sustainable Food Places is a UK-wide scheme which aims to develop food partnerships between local authorities, other public sector bodies, the private sector and the charitable sector to make the food system better for the local area in terms of the environment, health and well-being and the economy. So that's exactly what we had in mind before we'd even heard of Sustainable Food Places with capital letters. So it's no big surprise that earlier in the year, they gave us a £5,000 grant to develop an application. We're about to submit that application, which we think will be a formality. So that will bring £10,000 a year of part funding for a member of staff. What we found more surprising than that is that we've also been awarded £10,000 a year to operate a regional food group for the Highlands. Now, this is a scheme that's administered by Scotland Food and Drink. And although the scheme does include environmental and social aims, it's primarily about business growth. So we were actually really surprised to find that our rather alternative and some might say radical priorities were welcomed by Scotland Food and Drink. Now, I should say that both of these schemes require much funding, and in most cases that's provided by the local authority. In our case, we've secured 12 months of funding from the Pebble Trust to give us a total core budget of £35,000, which we think is just about enough to recruit a part-time development officer and provide some admin support. So I think there's two interesting lessons from this. Firstly, that we're finding that quite conservative bodies like Scotland Food and Drink currently see the need for a much more radical approach to the food sector. And we think that reflects a widespread enthusiasm for a food system that's better for the environment and better for the people at large and better for the people working in the sector. And I worry a bit that policymakers are maybe nervous that taking a more radical approach is going to be dangerous when the public is actually quite receptive. And the second thing that I wanted to raise from that was that, to be absolutely candid, the Pebble Trust is financing activity which in most of the UK would be funded by the local authority. And we need to get these initiatives adequately financed rather than relying on a sort of hit and miss access to charitable funds. I think the Highland Good Food Partnership offers the Council the opportunity to bring in external expertise at the highest level, but that can't be a one-way street. And we were absolutely delighted to see the new community growing post that the Council has taken on. And we hope that all of this is going to be the start of a really fruitful action-oriented partnership. And that kind of brings me on to my request to the Council. And some of you will, I hope, already have heard about the Glasgow Declaration on Food and Climate. And this is a commitment made by subnational governments around the world in the run-up to COP26 to make their food policies sustainable and calling on national governments to put food and farming at the heart of the global response to the climate emergency. It's interesting that around 75% of UK local authorities have declared a climate emergency, but only a third of those with a climate action plan have included actions to address food-related emissions. And so far in Scotland, only Glasgow Council itself and the Scottish Government have signed the declaration. So it seems to me that there's an opportunity here for the Highlands to take a position of leadership, and we really urge you to do that. But of course, signing the declaration is just a start, and we very much look forward to seeing that followed up with action. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Martin. And I can assure you that Mediterranean vegetables can be grown here. I grow my own Romanian-style peppers for pickling because I missed them when we came back here, and I'm still eating last year's produce just now. Also, the stuff that comes from the digesters, amazing stuff. I used it for mulching last year, and I've just started spreading it around on the new garden this year. So yeah, these things need to be used, and if anybody's close enough to the digesters near the airport, I would have a word, because the farmers are telling me they've got so much they can't use it all. So it's good if you can get a source for that. So if we other questions on that, Councillor Fraser, please first.
Hi Martin, long time no speak to. Thank you very much for that. At your very start, you mentioned Finland. Now, I remember being on holiday a number of years ago before I became a resident of the Highland, visiting the Aquatibui hydroponicum, and I remember back thinking they were actually growing bananas in there and various other subtropical fruit and veg. So what you've said there if that was expanded, there is no reason why we cannot do that in Highland. We've got the land space, we've got the space. It then comes on to having landowners engage with the process, because if they've got spare land that they're actually not doing anything, it might be fallow for a number of years. Can we not use land that is fallow to be repurposed? I think that's the terminology. But I'll leave it there because there's probably other questions that will come through from that.
I think you're right there, Craig. It's getting the landowners that's on board that's the problem. Martin, do you have a comment on that?
Well, only to say that the way the thing's developed is really quite a high-tech issue, with energy from renewables being used to create artificial lighting as well as heat. One of the key aspects of the project, I think, is to engage with UHI and encourage them to develop a specific expertise in the area. And they already have some links with Groningen University in the Netherlands, which is one of the leaders in this field. So I think there's some really exciting ways that this could go.
Yes, indeed. And we could actually go back to the time when we grew our own tomatoes here as well. We don't get any of these anymore. That's just gone completely. Derek.
Thanks, Trish, and thanks, Martin. It's a very interesting presentation. So, some of the things I picked up. Craig's done hydroponicum, so I won't go down there. But there's some other elements to this. One of the sort of issues in terms of trying to reduce our carbon footprint. I mean, food miles is clearly a big part of that. A lot of the kind of fruit in particular coming in here can have a really high number of food miles. So anything that's done to reduce those food miles is clearly benefiting the planet. One of the things that we're aware of in the Highlands is really the issue of waste heat. And I think one sector in particular, and that's the sort of whisky sector, distilleries waste a lot of heat. So I don't know whether your group had considered sort of contacting whisky distilleries to see whether there's any way that you could partner with them in any way to try and make use of the heat that they waste. My knowledge of this, when I was working in Ascent, I was sent to Findhorn to pick up a few ideas of interest, and I found my time there fascinating, and they were miles ahead of the curve in terms of the things they were doing, and a lot of the things I learned there have sort of stayed with me. One last point. A few years ago, I was looking at something called biochar, and one of the issues in the Highlands is the quality of the soil, and a lot of that is addressed usually by using agrochemicals. But another option would be to use charcoal to enhance the soil and to improve the crops that you can grow on it. So I hope that's maybe another issue that you might have a chance to have a look at. And I am going to leave it at that.
Thank you.
Well, thanks. Yeah, thanks very much for those. The waste heat and distilleries, that was something that was considered by the circular waste project group that we had. These project groups really, they were working together over 5 Monday afternoons. So there was a limit to how much ground they could cover. I think Zero Waste Scotland has some a sort of stream of work looking at that as well. But certainly what I'd like to see is that as this all develops and as we can bring in resources, because at the moment, as I say, we've got £35,000 for the next year, which is about enough to do a sort of core sort of admin function and coordination function, but not really enough to do anything else rather than what volunteers want to take forward and have the time to be honest. But I think that's certainly a very interesting thing to look at. The biochar, I don't know a huge amount about. I know Helen O'Keefe, who's one of our trustees and is also, to her credit, the Young Crofter of the Year, is on the call. I don't know, Helen, if you've got any input on biochar.
Helen, do you have that? Are you with us?
Yeah, I don't know much about it, but I'm involved in the Soil Association, and I know that there's a lot of them talking about it. So if we do want to find out anything, I can certainly get some contacts and some information about that.
That's fine. Maybe take that forward to a future meeting. Discuss that there. Thank you. Okay, Councillor Gray, please.
Yeah, it's a good presentation. It's an interesting area we're in. I think Martin kind of crystallised around the issue as regards resources initially. You know, how big is this project? How do you resource it? You know, what's the potential of it? You know, who's going to finance it? I wouldn't be too worried about being in a position where you're getting funds from different areas, because every organisation has to do that. Even a council has to. Highland Council has to go to Scottish Government and UK Government and all different organisations to try and get funding for various projects. And we're not on a regular basis. I appreciate it's different for organisations who don't have the basic resources to scope out the scale of the job, you know, to begin with. What points that Derek mentioned about potential energy sources, you know, whether you need heat or where you need light, are important. But you can only work in these things out if you do have the resources to do it. So I think the key thing would be, you know, to work out somewhere along the lines, get a business plan for this. Say, well, you know, what is the scope of this? You know, how can it be done? What is the timelines? What's a reasonable timeline to begin to work out good food? You know, how do we get good food into Highlands? How much can we grow ourselves? The food mileage is an issue, but it goes both ways. Even, you know, for gathering like food waste, you're into, you know, waste mileage too. So I think it's really, really important, although doing it at a scale, a commercial scale, is where we need to be. I think in winning the hearts and minds, I wouldn't underestimate the bit that Tricia's saying, you know, having people doing a bit of their own. It does raise awareness, does raise interest. You know, having a few raised beds in your garden, growing your own vegetables. It does. You're not going to feed the world, but it will feed your interest. So I think there's areas there that, you know, moving forward on that basis. But one that I think we do need to find out, you know, about this. You know, how do we scope this thing out? Where, you know, where's the business plan? What's the potential? How's it done? And where does the council come into this? If the council does come in. But I think these are a few questions that we do need to begin to. But getting good food is really, really important for us, and reducing waste is hugely important for us. We've got some good producers of food in the area, but we need to increase that. And maybe some detail too about, you know, we mentioned Finland. You know, making comparators. I mean, our climate is similar to Finland, so there's no reason why we can't be in that position. You know, so it's an area we just need to work on.
Yeah, and we don't need to forget either these biodigesters that we talked about. The ones that are local to me here are actually providing gas for Tornagreen. Joe, did you have something on the biochar? You had your hand up.
I did, yeah. I'm sorry. I thought I'd put my hand up early on, but then I realised I hadn't, and I just got it up before we moved on. So we've recently put in an application for a biochar-based carbon capture garden, which would hopefully be installed up at the Wick Industrial Estate. So it's just an application process. It's for £300,000 worth of funding, and we're partnering with an Edinburgh-based organisation called the Applied Negative Emissions Centre. It could work as a nice case study over the coming years to see what sort of benefits we get, not just for carbon sequestration, but biodiversity, maybe food growing and other benefits. And then we'll take it from there. And if it can be expanded to other parts of the Highlands and we can get the funding for it, it could be a really interesting trial period. We'll hear back in July if we've got the funding, and I'll keep you posted.
Oh, I can probably tell you where you could put it too, Joe. Emma, did you have a comment on this before we go on to Bill?
Yeah, thanks, Trish. There's a couple of points I was going to make just on the back of Councillor Gray's comments, and I was just saying that the Highland Good Food Partnership is working really hard to develop Nordic relationships. So there's great things going on in the Faroe Islands, there's great things going on in Finland, and we've got events planned later on in the year, well actually in the summer, international events to sort of showcase what can be done in similar type of climates is what's here. So that was just a positive thing to say that we are thinking like that. But just to develop further the ask that Martin's maybe had here about what can Highland Council do, for me personally, and I'm sure that Helen and Martin and Keith here as other trustees will agree, that only a small bit about what we need the Highland Council to do is money. In fact, we can probably actually cope without the money, because as you say, Councillor Gray, there's loads of opportunities out there to draw in money for things. If you have the right idea, then the money follows. And money really doesn't panic me too much. But what we really need the Highland Council to do, and this is imperative to this point, is that we need support. So food policy and sustainable food policy is integrated across the board, and that's part of what this Glasgow Declaration is about, is recognising that it's an imperative part of procurement, for example. So getting support from the Highland Council in terms of how food's procured in schools, that would be a massive step forward. That would be huge in terms of what we're trying to do. The fact that there's the recruitment of the community growing coordinator, I'm sure Councillor Robertson is just as excited as I am about that, because this is something that really answers a lot of need out there in terms of the community growing sector, which is absolutely and utterly growing and thriving here. So that's a great thing that the Highland Council are doing. I'd love to see that team expanding. But there's also thinking about food in terms of welfare, how we integrate that there, overall well-being. It's so multidisciplinary and across the board that I think that if we were able to tap into the various different departments and sections of the Highland Council to see where we could be adding value to what's already going on and making this whole sort of food policy agenda integrated, that would be, for me, absolutely and utterly first class. And that's what I'd love to see our relationship, or the Highland Good Food Partnership's relationship with the Highland Council look like, is ambitious, is sort of the shared understanding that food policy is so integrated, and even if we started off with something like procurement, that would be a really massive step forward. And that isn't about money, that's about realising the importance of this and realising that actually working together is how we're going to achieve things. So I hope that sort of kind of broadens a wee bit of potentially our scope here and how we can be working together. I certainly don't want anybody to think that it's just about money.
Yeah, part of it is seasonality too, because we did have a discussion about procurement earlier on, a couple of years ago, I think it is now. And one of the things that we found in the school meals service, for example, was that it needed to have fresh tomatoes. And of course, you can't get fresh tomatoes in Scotland at the best of times. So it's something that we can work on and probably progress as time goes on. And as we get these food growing partnerships going and the supply gets better, we'll be able to increase more of it. I think it's definitely something we should be working towards. Now, Councillor Boyd, you've waited a long time. Sorry, you can come in now, please.
It's all right, it's fine. Martin, Helen, Emma, great presentation, and I really hope we can go forward together and work together on this. I'm glad to hear that you realise it's not just about money, because what I've been thinking since the outset, from the first sentence you spoke, Martin, is how you've linked together the concepts, the ideas of, diet, climate, schools, waste, all being in one big system, and that we need to tackle it from all these different angles. This is what came up when I was reading up about the Glasgow initiative, and I'm glad to see you've picked up these ideas. It's I think education is a key doorway into this for you in your group. I'm sure you realise this already. In my ward, we had a self-sufficient business at one time run in a school. You know, they had some spare land, and they were growing their own. They were distributing it. They were selling it, and I don't see why it doesn't just need to be grants. Obviously, if we can help you, I hope we can help you. But if you can get some real front end line business involvement, and particularly the schools, if we can get the children going home telling their parents not to waste this food, I mean, that's just going to be great. The waste handling, I think, if it's got to be right up front there. You know, there's far too much going into landfill after all our initiatives. I just want to end by saying, good on you. Let's hope we can get this going in big style. And I would like to think about the educational side. You already spoke about UHI, and that's good. But in just down at the school level, getting the children involved, taking the messages home, doing a wee bit. I'll be trying to help out with my tomatoes, but that I can't feed the Highlands. Sorry.
If you can feed yourself, Bill, it's a good start.
Oh,
yeah, this is something we need to keep on the agenda, and we certainly need to. I know the schools are looking more at doing some outside stuff, and if they could follow the example of what's happening in Muirboard, it'd be fabulous. Especially the idea of taking what they've actually produced, cooking it, and eating it themselves. I think that's the best lessons out that we can possibly have. So yeah, we want to see this partnership grow and progress, and let's see us get something. Martin, would you like to say something else?
I just really wanted to come back to this funding issue, because you're absolutely right that, of course, we're adequately funded as we are for the next little while. But I think with a lot of these things, if you rely too heavily on community engagement and on short-term funding, then as soon as that short-term funding runs out, then everything collapses and you're back to square one. So I think where there is public benefit being generated by community activity, then at some point that has to be funded publicly, because otherwise it won't last. And I think that's so. I think certainly funding isn't the biggest thing that we need to talk about, but I think it is something which is there on the agenda and should be.
Yeah, I think sustainability has to be put in there somewhere. Angela?
Thank you, Chair. I won't repeat everything that's been said. I was just going to say that I was speaking to one of the local farmers just yesterday about a number of items, and one of the things he was talking about was allotments, and he said that some of the farmers would probably give up, or allow some of their land to be used for allotments to help grow. And at the end of the day, farmers know more about growing, crops and vegetables than many of us, especially at this meeting. So I wondered, are we looking at farmers? I know in the past Emma had in Muirboard had looked at a field, and when the community went to ask about the landowner about it, they then put it up for sale, and it kind of stopped the community from then taking that on. And I think too, I remember that my grandfather, he had his allotment and all these bees and everything right beside the railway line. And I think it's not just down to us or the Highland Council. We've got to work with a number of partners to make these changes and let everyone know where their food comes from. And many of the schools are already, as Bill said, having space to grow food, but none of us is as good as Food in Muirboard at the moment with all the intergenerational work, but I think that is improving. So thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Loudon.
Thanks for letting me back in, Trish. It's actually really in relation to the business of funding, and again, I think the distilleries are, if they get behind a project, like there's the oyster bed, the reef project, the restoration of the oyster beds in the Darnach Firth. Glenmorangie are funding that to quite a high level. So if they like the idea, they're a much better source of funding than Highland Council or a public agency would be, because it's their own resources, and if they support a thing, then your funding would be secure. So I think it's maybe another consideration to take on board.
Thanks, Derek. Well, it's clear that we've got a lot of enthusiasm for what's been presented here to move it forward, and we will nurture this partnership and get it going. As to the declaration, I think that would have to go to Council for approval for that, so perhaps we have to work on something there, whether it be a report or a motion to Council for that. But thank you very much for your time today, Martin. It's been good and encouraging to see, and we'd love to see lots more of this happening. There's a lot of threads to be pulled together to get it all to work together, and it starts now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll go back to where I was in the beginning, to item 4, and the Climate Change Programme Alignment Report. And I think this will be Keith that will be leading on this one. Get it right now, and I'm awake.
Thank you,
Keith.
Councillor Robertson, much appreciated. So members, this paper summarises the key recommendations arising from a piece of work which was commissioned back in early 2020, really to inform how we can better align council work streams and policies with those of the Scottish Government around the net zero agenda. And that's with a view largely to opening up new funding streams to help us expedite our shift to net zero emissions. Now, I'm conscious that this paper has already been presented to the Economy and Infrastructure Committee, but I felt it was important to also discuss it with you all as part of the Climate Change Working Group, as it will necessarily impact our corporate approach to achieving net zero and therefore merits some further discussion. Now, the timing of this paper is important for a number of different reasons. New statutory reporting requirements have now been set by the Scottish Government, which mean that, amongst other things, the Council must now set a target date for when we'll seek to achieve net zero direct emissions from our operations, and how we're going to align our spending plans with our carbon reduction ambitions. And whilst the Council has set a target date to achieve a carbon neutral Highland by 2025, as you all know, we haven't yet set that corporate net zero target date. And that is in all likelihood going to be much more challenging than achieving a net zero target date regionally, largely because we are much more limited in how we can use our estate to sequester or offset carbon that we can't get to zero elsewhere. So the report does highlight a number of critical actions which we really must undertake to put us on a firmer footing, and those are summarised at paragraph 5.6 of the report. And I think it's important to reference, as I've done many times before, that each and every service across the Council has a role in working towards net zero. The Climate Change and Energy team can't and shouldn't seek to achieve this agenda on its own. However, to be able to properly understand and map out how each service is going to contribute going forward, we do first need to agree what our target date for net zero emissions is going to be. And that's both a key priority set out within this paper as well as within the new Infrastructure and Environment Service Plan. Now, once a target net zero date has been agreed, it'll be much more straightforward to develop that corporate net zero strategy and a costed action plan. And the Climate Change and Energy team will play a fundamental role in securing the external funding to help plug any gaps that we might have around that. Now, members, before taking any questions, I just want to reiterate that we are building a really strong Climate Change and Energy team, which is being recognised as such by peers across both the public and the private sectors. We have a clear vision and sense of direction, which has been endorsed by the Climate Change Working Group, and will in the very near future have dedicated staff looking at the huge opportunities that the emerging hydrogen economy, transport decarbonisation, and as you've heard earlier, community food growing initiatives are going to offer both the Council and our Highland communities. And importantly, we also now have a dedicated co-funded project manager to lead on the Highland Adapts initiative, who we'll discuss later on, to help prepare our communities for the future impacts of climate change. Now, this programme alignment report is a further positive step forward and gives us a really clear steer in respect of the next steps the Council must take to support the shift to net zero. And I'll be very pleased to take any comments or questions on the report. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Keith. And members, some of you will have seen this before because we've got the 15 points there that are very important that we need to address. But one of the main things we need to do is to get this net zero target date in place. And I think we've penciled in a date for early August for the workshop. Keith, is that correct? I don't know if we've got an actual date yet, but that's where we're aiming for at the moment. So please be aware that that's coming very shortly. It's as quick as we can get it in. So we'll go to comments from members now. Councillor Loudon, you're first again, this one.
Thank you again, Trish, and thanks, Keith, for a very comprehensive report, which I've enjoyed making my way through. There's a few issues, I think. I think that first, page 19, 1.4. Yeah, it's the second line there that I kind of picked up on quite quickly. We don't reach net zero simply by wishing it. Yeah. And you know, if only it were that easy, but clearly it isn't. And what I like particularly about the report is that it's challenging us. It isn't really an easy read, because those 15 points are really the climate change staff telling us that if we're going to get to net zero, there are a large number of actions that we have to get on with, and there's one or two of the things in there that I'll maybe pick out, but you're quite right. We have to tackle all of them, you know, and it has to be a holistic approach across the council, looking at every aspect of our service provision. But I think number 10, you know my frustration with the position that we find ourselves in there. I had another discussion with them last week, and to see whether the distribution network was in line for enhancement to allow us to connect our own carbon-free generation to it. And what I was told was 2028 at the earliest, that it's nowhere in their capital programme. So there's no prospect of us being able to decarbonise our own buildings using solar PV. So again, there, my thoughts turned again to solar thermal, because that wouldn't be reliant on a grid connection. And is that an alternative way to go? You know, it's a political argument, and it's for us as a council to be taking this up with Ofgem and with the distributors, but also with Westminster, where this policy sits, to see if we can't persuade them that some alternative has to emerge. If we're going to be able to hit the targets we're setting for ourselves, if we're not allowed to connect anything, then clearly we can't change what we're doing, and it's such a fundamental problem. I realise I won't get time to kind of wander through all 15 points. We've talked about developing tree planting strategy for the council's estate, and I've talked to you about the region more widely and whether it's possible to roll that out. And I look forward to picking that discussion up at a future date. Yes, we should have a comprehensive land ownership record. You know, that and what you do with that land is important as well. we have to work smarter to make more out of our land. The other, my final point is really waste to energy. We're expending an awful lot of carbon carting all our rubbish to landfill in Peterhead. It would make an awful lot more sense for us to be dealing with that problem locally. I've done a lot of research in this area, but I'm not on the Communities in Place subcommittee that's dealing with this, and maybe there's I need to pass the information on to you in the hope that this can be picked up with a sense of urgency. You know, it's the cost of tracking all our waste around is up to £8 million a year. Clearly, the sooner we can reduce that, the sooner we can use that £8 million more wisely for other things.
Thank you, Derek. Well, if you're not on that group, you won't see much of what's been going on there, but there is a lot of talk about energy from waste. It's again down to the expense of the installation in the first place, the building of it. And our first step will be the materials recycling facility, which will hopefully make a difference. In most of the points in here are being worked at, but you're right, it is frustratingly slow to get things off the ground. Councillor Rixon next, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's a huge report, Keith. Thank you very much indeed. What I'm going to say is not by any means a criticism. It's just purely observations. It could take me a week to rattle through, but I know the Chair won't allow me that, so I'll be very quick to each point, please. Firstly, just to point out the tensions. One of the things we're looking for is economic recovery. One of the things that's most important in our economy is tourism. Tourism does necessitate travel. Travel means that it increases our footprint. So there is a tension there. There will always be that tension. Second thing, you have a descriptive diagram of the council's sphere of influence. I think it's actually much bigger than that represents. We affect how community councils think and behave. We affect how community planning partnerships think and behave. I think our sphere of influence, our sort of soft power, is much more extensive than perhaps is set out in that diagram. We talk about things like social care, education and health and so on. And I think we have to recognise that in a rural environment, all of these require local answers, not central answers. Now, central is more efficient and it saves costs and it saves footprint. But we don't want our old folks all channeled off into care homes in the big cities. We want them to stay local. We want small local schools as much as possible. So there are tensions there, and equally well with things like toilets. 2 or 3 years ago, we were thinking of closing them. Now nobody would dream of closing toilets because we need them. Social housing, there's a tension here. We want to improve the quality of social housing by working towards passive standards. The problem there is who pays for it? Usually the funder, but the tenant gets the benefit because they have lower fuel costs. It's an admirable objective, but we do have to sort out this tension of whether or not the payment is made by the funder or the tenant. Digital skills, I couldn't help smiling at that one. I worked for a long time as a computer studies teacher. The council that I worked for offered me early retirement. Scotland now has a national shortage of computer studies teachers. Which council offered me early retirement? Highland Council. One of the things which I noticed particularly in recommendation 1, I do wonder, we have an implications section before every council paper that comes before us, and it's normally about climate change / carbon clever. I wonder if that should be replaced with working towards net zero. In other words, we set ourselves that target, which is the sort of thing you talk about in recommendation 1. On page 34 and following, you talk about red areas as being low-hanging fruit. I couldn't help notice that things like burials and cremations, maintenance of burial grounds, war memorials and so on are in there. These are all really sensitive areas. The public will be really sensitive on these ones. So I don't actually think they are low-hanging fruit. I think they're things that have to be handled with great care. Equally well, I noticed in one of your staff responses, there was something about avoiding winter maintenance. I think politically that's a complete no-no. We have to keep the roads and pavements clear, regardless of the cost. I think we have to be honest there. On waste management, I went away for the first time in 9 months to see my daughter recently. She lives in South Ayrshire. I think she has 7 bins outside her front door. I have 2. In a city, I would have 3, one for garden waste. They recycle an awful lot more in South Ayrshire, including food waste, and it's perhaps an example we could look at. Job adverts, you talk about these. I do think we could push more in the job advert line about how we can offer or accommodate things like remote working. We had a council motion about that recently, and I think remote working is something we could advertise as being something we want to promote. I notice on page 63, we've got a diagram about a sort of eco park. District heating systems. We had a motion to council many months ago now, asking for a report to come back to council. I haven't seen that yet, but I do think we should be looking at district heating systems as a way of perhaps achieving some of those targets. I love the idea of mini forests. One of the reasons I much prefer them to the big ones is that I think it's easier to persuade communities to take ownership of them. And finally, I think there's a tension between sequestration as a land management target and agriculture. The agricultural output of Loch Harbour has declined by over 90% in a century. And we are on the one hand saying we want more local food production, and on the other hand, we want to say we're going to give over more land to carbon sequestration. There is a tension there, and I'd just like to point it out. Greatly in favour of the report, lots of wonderful stuff there. I'm not being critical at all, but I think we have to be honest about some of the tensions that linger beneath the surface. Trish, I apologise for going on at such length and so quickly. Thank you, Chair.
You managed to get a lot in there, Dennis. Well done. Keith, do you want to come back on Dennis's points?
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and Councillor Rixon. Thanks that picked up a lot of the fundamental things that I grapple with on a daily basis. I think that this is a massively complicated agenda, and there are always going to be tensions in terms of the transition to net zero, and we need to be cognizant of them. What this report really sets out is where I think that we've got the best opportunities, fundamentally in the first instance, to put ourselves on a firmer footing to get to net zero. And I think it's important to reiterate as well that the Scottish Government are really looking for the Council to set a target date for reduction of our direct emissions to net zero. And those are our emissions arising from our use of fossil fuels to heat our buildings, so the use of oil and gas predominantly, and fossil fuels to power our vehicles, which I think members would agree are much more straightforward on the face of it to decarbonise than a lot of the other areas, such as waste and such as electricity, which Councillor Loudon picked up on, which we don't really have any direct control of, that are out with the Council's direct control. I do appreciate your point in terms of the sphere of influence. I think that the point of that diagram is really to show what is within our direct control. Of course, we can influence out with, just the Council's pure operations, but we need to take into account what we do have direct control over. And one of those things, which is out with our control, as I've already alluded to, is the electricity network. And necessarily getting our electricity emissions to zero is predicated on partnership working and factors that are completely out with our control. So it's just really to highlight that point. I think I totally agree with your point about it being a rural area and us needing rural solutions. We're always going to want to provide services as close to the community need as we can. I guess from the Council's perspective, where we do have buildings and operations, we want to make sure that whatever is retained going forward as part of the asset rationalisation and new ways of working, that we as a Council are looking at how we can best invest in those assets to make sure that they are getting towards net zero, which will ultimately, help from a financial perspective as well, because, well insulated, well heated building, a low carbon building will be cheaper to run ultimately. Social housing, again, there was a seminar recently, which I can't remember if you attended, Councillor Rixon, but I thought it was excellent in setting out the challenges in achieving net zero social housing and the cost implications of that and the need for that uplift in order for us to meet that. There's no getting away from it. A lot of this agenda is going to cost money, but how we're trying to position the climate change and energy team is to bridge that gap fundamentally, to work out what the gap is and set some of our officers off to find the money to allow us to do that going forward, to the benefit of social housing tenants fundamentally as well. Digital skills, again, hard to disagree. I think that the digital aspect of the transition to net zero is being probably underplayed. We need to be much smarter about how we're managing our workforce. We're looking at an opportunity and a challenge to get to net zero, but fundamentally we need to be smart about how we empower our workforce and the wider Highland workforce to be able to make that transition, but being smart about how we do our work and how we deliver services. In terms of the implications section of the reports, I find that point really interesting, and I find it interesting for a number of reasons. I think that it would be fair to say that it's very much a tick box exercise for most council committee reports. It's not really given the weight that it deserves, nor the understanding at officer level, and that's no one's fault. It's just that there isn't a kind of clear set of guidance as to what needs to be picked up in terms of specific assessments for most of our committee reports. And it is a piece of work I've been chipping away at in the background, is how we can improve that going forward. But I do like the suggestion of potentially having a working towards net zero implication rather than climate change or carbon clever. In terms of sensitive areas, absolutely, there's quite a lot within the report which has been produced by a consultant or a range of consultants who don't maybe have the feel for the sensitivities around a lot of these issues. What they have done is picked up where the big chunky areas where we emit a lot of carbon through our operations are, and we have to work out, well, how do we sensitively tackle those going forward? Waste management, absolutely critical, I think, and it comes back to a few of the points made earlier. Really, we need to reduce the amount of waste we're producing as a region fundamentally. That helps save money in the first instance, and reduces the burden on the council significantly as well. But how we actually do that and making sure we're managing it as locally as possible is absolutely critical. Job adverts, totally agree with the point. I think we should be smarter about allowing remote working. And district heating systems is going to be a big issue. We have a statutory requirement coming up to produce a local heat and energy efficiency strategy by the end of 2023, with Scottish Government looking to zone specific areas for district heating opportunities, and it is something that we will need to grapple with fairly seriously. It's much more challenging to deliver, viable district heating schemes in a region like Highland than it is in a lot of other areas of Scotland, and we do need to be cognizant of that. But that's not to say there aren't really good opportunities out there. It's just finding the time and the resource to be able to map them out, I suppose. Mini forests, I think I totally agree. It's one of the recommendations I like most within this report. It's something that we can do fairly easily. Joe's doing a lot of work in terms of mapping the estate currently and where there might be opportunities for sequestration. So completely agree there. And in terms of sequestration and land management, obviously there's a big problem there in terms of how we manage that best. We have a disproportionate opportunity regionally to use our land to help Scotland meet its overall climate change targets, but how do we manage that appropriately with landowners and land managers? And that's again a piece of work that's being sensitively looked at by the Landscapes as Carbon Sinks project up in the Flow Country, and I think that will hopefully provide a lot of the answers to that question. And just linking back to Councillor Loudon's points, if I could quickly, completely hear your points about SSEN and the distribution network and the issues there. I don't think they're going to go away anytime soon. But one of the really positive things that's come out of not just this report, but wider discussions arising from the indicative regional spatial strategy and the recognition, probably through NPF4, of the disproportionate role Highland will play in the transition to net zero, is that there is really a need for much closer partnership working in order to develop that holistic strategy for how the region transitions to net zero. And the understanding that we've had from initial conversations with Scottish Government and former employees of SSEN is that they are very willing, if we can develop an understanding of where the biggest asks are in terms of renewables, they will work with us and are a willing participant in that. So we're not where we'd like to be, but we are moving forward much more positively around that. And again, just to make the point, and I think it's a really important point to reiterate, the decarbonisation and getting us down to net zero from an electricity consumption perspective is the biggest challenge we face. It's not something that we can do. The consumption has remained static or even increased over the past few years. It's a challenge to reduce that and start to see a downward trend in terms of consumption, and then it's a bigger challenge to deploy suitable renewable opportunities to get it actually down to net zero. But what we do have direct control over, and where the focus needs to be now, is on how we get our fossil fuel consumption down to net zero, and converting our buildings to low carbon heat sources and making sure that we're taking a proactive, managed approach to decarbonising our fleet. And I think we're in a really good position in that regard. We're getting an officer in to support that agenda, work out where the charging infrastructure needs to be to facilitate that transition, and also the wider hydrogen transition is massive too. Our new hydrogen project manager starts on the 7th of June and should really help to drive that agenda forward, especially for the heavy goods fleet. So apologies, that was very rushed. I hope I've picked up most of the points.
Done, Keith. Go to Councillor Fraser now, please.
Thank you very much. This is some piece of work that you've managed to pull together, Keith, with you and your team. It really is impressive. Many of the comments that have been made by Dennis and Councillor Derek Loudon there, you know my position on the grid connectivity, so I shan't bore you all with that again. My focus has moved to the marine environment, and I remember from one of the meetings that you supplied the link to the SNH work on blue carbon. Now, the way I'm looking at this, it's on pages 68 and 69. 4.4 is blue carbon, and 4.10 is to do, I would say, sporting estates. Now, I'm very much a big fan of rewilding, because if you rewild, you remove monoculture. And if I put into a very basic context, monoculture is, you could look at oilseed rape and the big, the big yellow fields everywhere. That to me is a monoculture. What we have with sporting estates, and I'm probably going to get loads of angry people come turn up at my door now I've said that. It's just a heather monoculture. There's very little, from what I can tell, life there apart from certain species. And I think on that side of things that there needs to be, I think we could expand on that. And on the marine environment, I've asked questions, who is the final arbiter of the environmental protections? And I have actually put a submission to the Inner Firth Local Development Plan with that very question. I've been asking it for a number of years now, and I still don't get a response either from MPs, MSPs, because it seems quite a difficult question to answer. I shan't touch on the internal market bill, because a lot of what we do here as a local authority and as the Scottish Government has to go hand in glove with what is proposed at a UK level. And that is giving me some cause for concern, because we can be as forward thinking, as exciting, as dynamic as we possibly can, but there are other flags in the wind, for want of a better word, that could slow our ambition down. So if you could probably expand on the blue carbon and the kelp forests and stuff like that, and how the marine environment protections can be tailored into this, because I think that is an area that does need expanding. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Keith, do you want to come back on that, or do you want to pass it to Joe?
Happy for Joe to come in on it. I'll just make a very quick point in that I think that we vastly underestimate the size and the scale of the blue carbon resource. And I think that one of the challenges that we're going to face in terms of the protection and the expansion of that asset base until it is recognised and actually accounted for in terms of our overall emissions portfolio, both nationally and regionally. And I think it's something that is certainly being looked at, but very much in a similar vein. I think the conversation in terms of peatland and the emissions arising from our peat resource is going to hit the national inventory over the coming 12 months. And I think the conversation around that will change dynamically very quickly, because we'll recognise that the scale of the challenge to actually get to net zero nationally is much more difficult because of the degraded peat. Similarly, until we actually are able to formalise and understand the scale of the blue carbon resource, it will always be something that's kind of on the periphery. So I totally agree, it's something we need to continue to push for, and it was raised and certainly the climate change workshop that was held earlier this week as part of the NPF4 conversation. So it certainly is rising up the agenda. Joe, I don't know if you want to come in and add anything on that.
Yeah, I wish I had something more to say than I do. I think I've had a number of conversations about blue carbon monitoring, because a lot of the information that we have is quite outdated. I've spoken to a couple of charities down in Cornwall who have done seagrass monitoring. A lot of this is citizen science, so it's asking people, maybe up here it would be the countryside rangers, to do this when they're and also to broaden it out to people who go walking in the area regularly. There's not really a strong structure for it. I think from when we had the blue carbon experts talking at this group last year, one of the things that they said was that political and public awareness of blue carbon is about 10 years behind peatlands. So it may be that we're moving in the right direction, and that's possibly why you're not getting answers, because I would really be interested in the same answers that you're after, Councillor Fraser. I think in terms of what we can do, there's an application which I'm hoping to put in the next few months for green infrastructure, which the application would include some salt marsh restoration in addition to peatlands as well. So it might be that we can claim some funding for that kind of work, but right now there's not really a plan for dealing with our blue carbon within our team. I think a lot of it will be monitoring in the coming years, raising awareness of what the resource is, what state, what condition it's in, and from there maybe applying for the sort of funding we would need to actually do something about it. When it's quite close to the coast, including the salt marshes, a lot of the issues are quite similar to those of peatlands. You've got agricultural runoff, you've got drains which are keeping water off the land when it should be kept on. But yeah, I'm afraid that's all I've got for you at the moment.
Thank you. Councillor Boyd, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Keith, to you and your team for this important report. I particularly like the clarity of the action orientation in the list. Thanks for that. Going green is a huge project, as you can see from that list. It's a programme, and it will affect every corner of what we do in the council, and probably every department, every section, every service. I can't fault your 15-point list, so I'm not going to go through them. I mean, one could talk about the sequencing and what the priorities might be, but perhaps we could do that in the workshop, which I'm really looking forward to. One thing I just might mention, maybe at the bottom of your list, is we should source all the contracts we can locally within Highlands, build and develop the capabilities here for the long term. Looked at from that point of view, this is an economic development opportunity. It's not a cost, it's an injection of funds into our region. So I'd like to stress that. The other thing is I'm very fond of measurement, and presentation of these measures will be a really important part of your programme. I really want to encourage you and your team, Keith. This is an exciting opportunity you're putting in front of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Keith, do you want a final comment on this before we move on?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a very quick point. I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head, Councillor Boyd. This is a massive economic development opportunity, and I think if we're serious about community wealth building as a mechanism to not just improve local outcomes, it's a great way to reduce our emissions profile as well. One of the things that we don't capture terribly well, and nobody really captures terribly well, is the impact of our procurement decisions on climate change and the embedded emissions that arise from our purchasing decisions. So the more realistically of the spend that we can keep within our region, the lower the emissions profile fundamentally. So it does have multiple benefits, and that will be touched on in a later paper as part of the just transition. And in terms of measurement of measures, absolutely. I think one of the fundamental things we need to get right in terms of the development of the net zero strategy, once that corporate target date is agreed, is to make sure that we have measurable and monitorable KPIs, and that we're setting realistic targets, not just in terms of the overall emissions, but on almost a sector by sector level, so that we know exactly where we are, and we can hold individual services and officers to account in terms of meeting those targets. So yeah, couldn't agree any more around that.
Thank you. All of members, can we agree to make recommendations? Move on. Agreed? Yeah, thank you.
Agreed.
I will move on to item 6, Highlands adapts a place-based approach to climate change adaptation. And you have the report in front of you, and I think Emma's going to give a presentation on this one. Welcome, Emma.
It'll be me, I'm afraid.
Oh, I thought it was Emma that was doing this. She's just answering questions then. Yeah,
well, she's here to say hello and yeah, potentially take any questions, but she's literally just in the door, so I'll not put too much pressure on her.
Okay,
but really, members, I think it's first and foremost, it's important to note that the climate is changing, and even if we do achieve our regional and national net zero ambitions, the way that we deliver services is necessarily going to be impacted by more frequent and extreme weather over the coming years and decades. And to that end, we really need to start preparing and understanding the risks and opportunities that the changing climate is going to pose to our region. Now, climate change, as you all know, is a cross-cutting issue which needs a coordinated, joined-up approach if it's going to be tackled successfully. And the Highland Adapts initiative is going to play a pivotal role in that agenda moving forward. Now, over the past couple of years, I've been engaging widely with public sector partners to understand the appetite for coordinated action, and that's really been a hugely positive exercise from my own perspective. There's a really wide-scale appreciation across Highland that working together and taking a place-based approach to adaptation is the right thing to do, and we now have an established partnership as well as a dedicated project manager to drive the initiative forward. Members, one of the most important aspects for the partnership in taking Highland Adapts forward is to ensure that we do pioneer a fair, inclusive and integrated approach to adapting to climate change. Highland Adapts is seeking really to involve communities in all aspects of its work, because we recognise that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to climate action. The initiative is going to work proactively to ensure that disadvantaged and underrepresented groups are involved and benefit equally from the work that will flow from Highland Adapts. And just before taking any questions, I'm really pleased to be able to introduce you formally to our Highland Adapts project manager, Emma Whittam. Emma's a familiar name and face to most of you, having presented to the Climate Change Working Group in the past. And she does bring a real wealth of experience and knowledge to this important role. And I'm sure you'll all join me in welcoming her to the new post and wishing her every success in driving this forward. But I am happy to take any questions on the paper. Thank you.
Thank you. So we've got any questions on this report? Welcome again, Emma. Sorry to have nearly put you on the spot there. Dennis.
Thanks, Chair. Not so much a question as an observation, Keith and Emma, welcome. It's simply in that throughout this paper, there's reference to the need for strong community engagement, and there's also reference to the community planning partnerships. Now, in another forum, I can't remember, it was Highland Council, E&I, we discussed this and the fact that the very varied quality of community planning partnership successes throughout Highland. And I believe our head of policy is talking about arranging a seminar to deal with exactly this. I can't help feeling if your plans here should be one of the things that's discussed at that seminar, because it's absolutely critical that if this is going to be successful, that it's also taken up by these community planning partnerships at a local level and delivered at a local level. So it's just simply an observation that great, lots of good things to look forward to here, but in order to get it working in practice, we actually need to get those community planning partnerships taking it on board and delivering locally, as we hope it will. Thanks very much, Chair.
Councillor McLean, Angela.
Yeah, my only comment is in a recent experience I had, and it was concerning perhaps flooding in one of the lochs close to where I live. And that we did get all the partners round the table and everyone, including Highland Council. And it was with help with one of the local farmers that managed to do that. And everybody was very understanding, but nobody wanted to take responsibility for making any improvements, because they felt that if they did take the responsibility of, for instance, say if a reservoir flooded, or the impact that would have on houses or farmland lower down, nobody wanted to actually do anything. So I wondered how will this work? The idea and everyone working together, and I can see there is some funding, but who would take the lead? Because sometimes that happens in community planning partnerships too, in that nobody really wants to take the lead, and that they would then be maybe responsible for the downstream consequences. In this stage, it really was downstream consequences.
Thank you. Keith, you want to come back on that?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. just in terms of Councillor Rixon's point, how to get the most out of the community planning partnerships, I think that's a very, very good question. And I think what we're going to try and do is really build this from the community up, and really, rather than it being a talking shop, it's about action on the ground and understanding and speaking to local communities and finding out, where the threats, the opportunities, what the feelings are about specific places are, so that we can build up a picture and a proper risk profile across the region, and that will feed into other reporting mechanisms. But yeah, fundamentally it needs to do both. I think it needs to be very much a bottom-up approach, but we are going to need to, particularly from a funding perspective down the line, as Angela's referring to, bottom that out as well. But really what we're seeking to do through the initiative over the kind of 3 years that we've got funding for at the moment is build up that vision for what a climate ready Highland looks like. We need to develop a communication strategy, how we're going to get out and understand the needs and the risks that are affecting local communities, and then build the action plan, which will be taken forward. And I think to answer Angela's point, it's going to be an ongoing dialogue. There isn't going to be a one-size-fits-all approach to who needs to do what and where the money's going to come from for this. But fundamentally, we're starting from a fairly low baseline. In terms of adaptation, the focus has been very much to date on mitigation, how we're going to get to net zero. But the reality is now that we're facing a pretty bleak future in many places across the region, and it's trying to address that as proactively as we can, understand where the risks are, as well as the opportunities, because there will be some communities that benefit enormously from the changing climate, whereas there'll be others that are disproportionately impacted. So it's very early days. Emma's going to put a stamp on this, but what the partners all agree is that this needs to be a community-led initiative. It can't be something that we dictate to our communities. They need to be fundamentally a part of what Highland Adapts will deliver going forward.
Thank you. Councillor Loudon, then Councillor Campbell. Derek, you first again.
Thanks, Trish, and thanks Keith and Emma for the report. Yeah. I think what we have here is an attempt to draw the different strands in the Highlands together, and I think that's definitely a good thing. Quite often, individual organisations will work in their own silos, and silo working is oblivious to what other organisations working in the same areas are doing. So what this will do, as far as I see it, is pull those threads together with, in our case, somebody to coordinate that effort and make it work for our individual communities. So that's widely to be welcomed. I welcome Emma to her new role in the council, and I look forward to working with her in the months and if I'm still here, the years ahead.
Thank you, Derek. Councillor Campbell, please, Liz.
I endorse everything Angela said. We were always told as councillors it's the source where the water comes from that's the responsible body. I'm dealing with a case right now at Strathpepper where a farmer's crops are ruined owing to the water coming down on his land but it's the landowner's responsibility in this case, but the landowner's not doing anything. I think we need, and communities can't really do anything about it. So we need more government power to enforce the landowners to do it. Is there something about it?
Agreed. Keith, have you anything else to add to that?
Not a huge amount. I think that in terms of Councillor Loudon's points, this is about not all individual partners doing their own thing. Taking a collective approach to this is such a sensible way to do it. It's sharing the burden, it's sharing the risk, and it's helping understand a much more robust level what the risks and opportunities are across the region. So I think that is definitely to be welcomed. And in terms of Councillor Campbell's point, I think that one of the benefits of doing this piece of work over the coming years is it helping us build up that risk profile, so we understand better where, you know, the big challenges are going to come from, so that we can engage proactively with the right agencies to make sure that we're mitigating the risk and making sure that the right people pick up the tab for the measures that are going to be required to protect our communities and our individual constituents. So again, it's early days, but it will paint a fairly good picture, I think, over the coming years, and we'll understand much more as time goes on. Emma, do you want to add anything to anything that I've said?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Keith. Well, first of all, hi, with another kind of hat on. I'm absolutely super excited to be here and really looking forward to getting into this role. Only thing I wanted to share, which I thought might be slightly reassuring if nothing else, is that earlier on in the week, I've spoken with and met every partner, had a really, really good chat with them all, and they're all really, really enthusiastic. They're all really, really committed. They're all really into this idea of working together, and not just, I felt it was really sincere. There was some real, genuine, authentic conversations, and Keith's done a fantastic job getting to where we're at with this, because these the partners are really bought into the whole concept of us actually working together as a team. They were using this word as a team. Do you know, all these different organisations working together towards one goal, and certainly a task for the next few months is going to be bringing us together through developing a process of developing a joint vision, a joint set of values, whereby we're all of the same context and we're all working together. And the dominant partner in any particular within any particular community, it'll be dependent on what the risk or the opportunity is, and they see that, and they really there's no weak links here. It really is an exciting time, and I really sense a different feel and a real appreciation for the importance of partnership working on this. So that's all I've really got to add at this point, and I hope that just is reassuring that I really do believe that we've got a great team of people here that want to work as a team, and I look forward to reporting back on the progress of this over the coming months and years, because I think it's really an exciting initiative. So it's great to be here.
Thank you, Emma. It's good to have you here. And it's really good to see that we're at an exciting point where all the background stuff seems to have been done and we're ready to take the next step, and maybe move a wee bit faster too if we could possibly manage it. It's great. So if we could just note the contents of the report then, members, please. That's okay, we can move on. Thank you.
Okay.
And that takes us to item 7, just translation, and we have another new member of the team, I think, going to present this. Katie, you say hello, and I'll hand over to you. Welcome, Katie.
Hello members. Hello everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm Katie Andrews, and I'm one of the new climate change coordinators. So I'll be working with Keith and Joe to deliver all the exciting climate projects that we've got going on. I've got a short slide show that I would like to share with you. Just loading up now. There we go. Can you all see that?
Not quite. It's just coming up. That's it now.
Perfect. Okay. So starting off, firstly, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to present my first paper at the Climate Change Working Group. You may have already heard of the Just Transition and the report which was published from the Just Transition Commission at the end of March. I will briefly outline the report which has been submitted to the committee, which provides an update on the Just Transition and places it in a Highland context. So just to get the essence of the report and the transition, this transition needs to be a national mission with social justice at its heart. So setting the scene for this paper, the Scottish Government has pledged to end Scotland's contribution to climate change no later than 2045. And the Highland Council, as we've heard before, has recommitted to achieving a carbon neutral Inverness and low carbon Highland by 2025. We need to ensure that this transition to carbon neutrality is equal and inclusive. This transition will be transformational for our economy and society, and one which we need to guarantee is achieved by the people of Scotland and the Highlands, not done to the people of Scotland and the Highlands. So in a Highland context, we need to address the unique challenges across the Highland region. To this end, the Just Transition Commission was set up in 2018 to engage with different people across all sectors and social backgrounds to develop an understanding of the challenges which we face in achieving carbon neutrality. The report from the Just Transition Commission explores where we are now, how we can deliver a just transition, and provides a look to the future. It provides practical, realistic, affordable recommendations that will support Scottish ministers to take action. The paper I'm presenting to you summarises the principles put forward by the Just Transition Commission and puts them into a Highland context. So what does a just transition mean for the Highlands? So we've got to think about our energy system, our industrial base, our buildings and how we heat them, our transport system, and how we use and manage our land. So coming onto our energy system first, obviously there's a lot of technicalities behind this, but obviously it's the transition from carbon intensive systems to more sustainable sources. So investments in green hydrogen, for example, the Cromarty Firth developments, wind farms and hydro energy, which we have a great opportunity to showcase through the Riverness Hydro Scheme, which I'm supporting Martin MacDonald with. We want to ensure that the Highlands is seen as a hub for sustainable energy practices, and people are offered training to develop skills required to transition into these workplaces. So coming onto our industrial base, there'll be a greater inward investment in local supply chains through community wealth building, which I'll speak about a bit later. Explores this and outlines strategies which can help investments stay within Highlands. We will need to work hard to involve and empower communities to embrace this green industrial revolution. So in terms of our buildings and how we heat them, there's obviously a great challenge which comes with this in the Highlands due to the geography and the age of properties. As we transition, we need to tackle the issue of fuel poverty and safeguard people's rights to a warm home. Coming on to our transport system, obviously we have nearly 8,000 kilometres of roads in Highlands, so this means there's a greater dependence on cars. So we need to develop on the success of the EV infrastructure and develop more wide-scale active travel networks across Highlands. And then finally, how we use and manage our land. So obviously we've got a 20% larger land mass than Wales, and around 68% of our Highlands is peatlands. The reason I mention this is the Just Transition Commission outlines that in the coming years there'll be less agricultural land and more woodland and peatland cover. So obviously Highlands has a great opportunity to enforce this. So delivering on a just transition, the Just Transition Commission report outlines 4 key messages which umbrella 24 recommendations. So the first one, as you can see on the screen, pursue an orderly managed transition to net zero that creates benefits and opportunities for people across Scotland. Delivery of this must be a national mission. The second is to equip people with the skills and education they need to benefit from this transition. The third one is to empower and invigorate our communities and strengthen local economies. And finally, to share benefits widely and ensure burdens are distributed based on the basis of ability to pay. You will see from my report, I have included a table which lists all the messages and subsequent recommendations and how Highland Council can adopt these key principles. I won't go into all of them now, but in a Highland context, there's a strong focus on place-based approaches and empowering communities to make the changes required to the transition to carbon neutrality. We need to build strong local supply chains and focus on establishing social partnerships, ensuring equality is at the centre. So finally, look to the future. We in Highland are in a great position to adopt the principles of a just transition. We have the Highland Adapts initiative, which you've just heard about, which focuses on place-based approaches to climate change adaptation and will provide a crucial steer and delivery mechanism for the just transition. I will be supporting Emma Whittam, the new Principal Project Manager for Highland Adapts, and this project will have community engagement at the centre, which both myself and Emma are really looking forward to. In terms of our EV infrastructure and active travel networks, we need to build on the strong progress to date and focus on making it more inclusive for people all across Highlands. Also, by embedding the concept of community wealth building into the Council's economic recovery, we can integrate sustainable practices which will benefit everyone in the Highland region. And this will improve our local supply chains, which will have wide-reaching benefits to the full region. The Highland Council has a real opportunity to underpin the principles of a just transition and set an example of good practice for other local authorities across Scotland. So thank you very much for listening to me, and I'll take any questions now.
Thank you. Katie, if you could take your screen down now, please, that would be great. Just had one concern that I noticed in what you were saying there, that we're talking about less agricultural land, and that's a wee bit concerning when we're just sitting here talking about growing more of our own food, because right now we don't. But then presumably the grazing land would be more likely that is one of the things to do. And I wonder if you could just explain that a wee bit, please.
Yeah, so obviously with the Just Transition Commission, it's very based on a national sort of scale. So obviously within Highland, we don't have a massive amount of agriculture at the moment. So that's basically what the Commission is coming out with saying. So in terms of a Highland context, I don't think there'll be a massive impact. It's more sort of putting it into the context of more peatlands and woodland creation.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Rixon.
Thank you, Chair, and Katie, welcome. And my comments, observations and queries are all to do with pages 97 and pages 98, which are the precise recommendations which you have. The first one is to do with number 6 on page 97, where you talk about a carbon border tax and the need to mitigate against the threat of offshoring emissions and jobs. I appreciate that we have to be quite concise when we're putting things into these sort of tables, but I would welcome it if you could just elaborate slightly on that one for me, please. The second point is to do with number 7, and linked with that, number 17, which is about sustainable local produce. And this actually builds on precisely the point that the Chair has just made, which is, where do we stand on agriculture in the Highlands? Now, you've just explained that perhaps it won't impact so much here, but crofting, for instance, has always been held up as an example of really environmentally friendly agriculture. And I just sense that there's a little tension emerging in some of these points between, we're talking here about additional support for retiring farmers and agricultural transformation and so on, that there's potentially a tension here. We've noticed that there's already a radical decline in the amount of food production in the Highlands. We're wanting more locally sourced produce. We're wanting sustainable agriculture. And I just would like to tease out what I think could be a sort of slightly problematic area in the future surrounding whether or not we support agricultural work in the Highlands. The second thing is, the next thing rather, is on point number 8, where we're talking about climate change learning in schools. Now, as the Chair will also know, there is an organisation called Teach the Future, which has been very active amongst the older pupils in school. And the Chair has been approached by this group in the past, and I believe there are 2 Highland Council officers who are looking at this because they are very keen on improving climate change teaching in schools and basically making it centre stage in the curriculum. And I think that that's an important thing, and it's really good to reach out to this group. The last thing I would say is on item 24, where we're talking about moving away from GDP as a main measure of national progress. Now, I fully understand that, and yes, there are lots of other things we can talk about, and some countries have happiness indexes and so on. I have no problem with that whatsoever. But I think we also have to recognise the sort of economic facts on the ground, so to speak, which are that particularly in areas in the north and west, we're hugely dependent on the tourist industry. And what's happened over the COVID pandemic is that the applications for universal credit in the Highlands have absolutely gone through the roof. And the 7 worst areas are all in the north and west. So there is a tension here also between moving beyond GDP as a measure of national progress and recognizing the economic realities on the ground, which is that we currently have an economy which is very heavily dependent on a tourist industry and the difficulties that creates. Chair, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you. Councillor Campbell, please.
I just want to endorse everything that Dennis said. He's already said what I was going to say about crofting agriculture. I mean, it's the mainstay of the Highlands, the crofters with the sheep and the cattle. So where do they stand? What's the future for them?
Okay, if we could come back to Katie on that one, please, before we go for one.
Yes, of course. So I'll try and answer to the best of my ability. So just coming back to Councillor Rixon's first point on the carbon border tax. So obviously this is more within a Scottish government remit. In terms of a Highland context, it's about making sure that we're not offshoring any of our carbon footprint. So in terms of where we're sort of manufacturing goods that we're bringing in and sort of putting that into an international context. But I'm happy to sort of go away and sort of do a bit more research and come back to you for that one. In terms of the agriculture, I think what's outlined in the Just Transition Commission is recommendations to the Scottish Government about how we can ensure that it is equal, and even with the reducing amount of agricultural land, people feel supported. So in terms of an agricultural transition, so there's a programme being set up which is basically going to ensure that farmers feel supported through this transition and there is more benefits through them. So it's just about making sure that it's as equal as possible. And in terms of the education side of things, yes, I'm completely on board with making sure that it is getting down to schools, and I'm actually involved in the Energy Sparks programme, which is obviously looking at the energy efficiency of our schools, and this basically is a toolkit which school children can go on and access and have real life data about their school and how it's contributing to the overall carbon footprint. So we're really trying to endorse that at the moment and promote that within schools. So very keen to get that up and running and sort of progressed. And in terms of the GDP, I think it's not so much that we're going to move completely away from looking at gross domestic product, but it will be more inclusive to sort of involve a lot of social elements as well, and seeing sort of what poverty line we're on, where fuel poverty is involved, and a lot of well-being ideas around that. I hope I've answered some of your questions, but I'm happy to go away and research any points that you might want some elaboration on.
I think it's become clear from just the discussion so far that the unique position of Highland has not been fully considered in this. So we maybe have to go back and look at that. Councillor Loudon, please.
Yes, Trish, I think I'm probably going to echo your points there to a certain extent. Yeah, really, when we set out to have a look at the transition, what actually came out was that the Highlands is in quite a unique position. It may be the case that in other parts of the country, climate change is a challenge, but for the Highlands, in a lot of areas, it's an opportunity. Many of the things that the country needs, in terms of making the changes that we need to adapt to climate change, are found in the Highlands. So we have the capacity for sequestration and carbon storage. We have the capacity for wind power. We have the capacity on and offshore. We have the capacity for hydropower. We have the capacity for tidal power. All of those things, at present, a lot of that power is carried away from the Highlands. But as things expand, either we get in an argument over Bewley to Denny 2 and 3, or we can try and attract firms that use that energy to the Highlands. So there are a lot of sectors, my colleague Councillor Rosie in particular draws reference to data centres as a potential use for the energy that could be generated in the Pentland Firth. So I think what I'd like to see as this goes through the iterative process is for an acceptance that we don't actually have to see our GDP as something that will inevitably be negatively impacted, and that we can grow our economy at the same time as we adapt to climate change. And I certainly accept what you're saying about the other measures in there. We can also tackle fuel poverty. We can also tackle poverty in general and the attainment challenges that have been accentuated by COVID. We have a lot of problems out there, but we have to maintain a kind of positive outlook, and we have to see the opportunities there as well.
Thank you, Derek. Emma, did you want to come in on this point? At this point.
Thanks, Councillor Robertson. I just wanted to add a wee bit of support to Katie and maybe put a wee bit of meat on the bones with the whole sort of agriculture tension type conversation that we've been having, not just in this point, but also in Keith's paper. And I just wanted to sort of highlight that the things that the members are coming up with here are the issues that we are picking up through the Highland Good Food Partnership. This is part of one of the reasons why I've created the Highland Good Food Partnership, because our voice is not being heard down in Edinburgh and the Central Belt. Policies and land management policies and food policies that work down there, they don't work up here. That's why the Highland Good Food Partnership is really, really important. It's a really important voice. And when we're working and what we're doing, we're not just working up here. We are working with MSPs. We're working with policy teams down there. And all I would add is that I personally do not think that it's sheep or trees. I think there's real scope to reimagine what the Highlands can look like, change our narrative of what we think is what we can grow here and what food production looks like. I know many crofters and smallholders that have got livestock, veg growing, and they're carbon neutral. Some are even carbon negative. It's possible, and what we need to start doing is getting these positive stories out there and showing policymakers that the Highlands isn't actually somewhere where you just can graze sheep or you have to then plant trees. And that's going back to what I was saying, probably about an hour ago about the importance of working with partners in Nordic regions, seeing what they're doing in the Faroes, seeing what they're doing in Finland, and using those stories from these other countries to show our policymakers and people in this country what you can actually do in areas with similar climates and topographies like the Highlands. And it's not something that is just A or B. We can really be driving forward, and on a world stage be showcasing how we can be using agroecology principles here to be managing carbon sequestration at the same time as producing food. It is possible. We just need to be positive about it and ambitious about it. So I hope that kind of helps, Katie, because I was feeling you were a wee bit stumbled on that one. So I hope that helps.
Yes, it certainly does, but I don't know how we're ever going to get rid of these massive diesel guzzling tractors that we've got running around my particular area anyway, that's for sure. Craig next, please.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine, for this piece of work. I'm not going to pick up on what, again, Dennis and Derek have said about the grid. That's always been a huge bugbear of mine. It's like a bucket. You can only fill the bucket so much. If you want to put more water in the bucket, you fill it with holes. And the holes are where we connect to district heating systems and some of the other topics, the industries that Derek has mentioned. I've picked up on point 22, divestment. Now, I'm saying this from a position of being on the Pensions Committee, and the last Pensions Committee, we touched on divestment of a certain part of the fund. Now, there's you should be able to pick up this information because it was released to the Pensions Committee that our amount of fossil fuel investment in our pension fund as a percentage is relatively small. So we have an opportunity here to divest from the fossil fuel element and re-establish that into more sustainable investment elements. And that would be down to the investment subcommittee to discuss that and the pensions committee. But I think I shan't go into the actual figures, but it's not a huge amount of money when you compare it to the whole of the Highland Council Pension Fund. So we've actually got opportunities there to actually enhance our carbon neutral element within the Highland Council Pension Fund. And in fact, a number of countries across the world are divesting from fossil fuel companies and local authorities. I think Glasgow is at the forefront of divestment from arms manufacturers and fossil fuel companies. So I think that is a very timely point on point 22. So that was very well made.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Craig. Angela?
Yeah, I'll probably not go over some of the points made. I'll pick on item 13, participatory budgeting. We've talked about it as a council for some time, but we seem to have delayed this moving forward with getting our funding out to communities. I hope that will move forward pretty soon. Number 18, which was about the 20-minute neighbourhoods, and I mean that can work well in cities, but in rural areas that could be much more difficult. And is it 20-minute neighbourhoods, is that by walking, cycling, or by car? In Highland it would be more often than not by car. And further down, Dennis touched on young people in education, and I think there's a thread through this that shows the importance of Highland Council working closely with third sector organisations. I think one thing from COVID is it showed that if you really want to get in touch with your community, it's those groups that are out there based in the community that knows much more about what the community need is than the local authority. And I wondered about young people, although it's touched on, are we going to be doing much more working with young people through the youth work organisations that are out there that are linked to the Highland Youth Work Network through Youth Highland? And I know we have High Life Highland working with the schools, but many of the youth work organisations are based in the community. At point 11, talking about farmers and land managers training. And I know Nicole's here, and I wondered if she knew any more about what's happening about the regional land use partnerships that Highland is going to be one of the pilots for, because then if farmers and land managers do get a lot of training as well, and I think that it's about that working together. And so I think all my other points have been covered, Chair. Thanks.
Do you want to come back on that, Nicole, first before I go to Katie? Land ownership.
Sorry, Trish. Yes, yeah. Hi, Angela. Just in terms of the regional land use partnerships, as you've just stated, we are a pilot area. We have secured a sum of money to enable us to start that process, but it's very much a very early process, and the money is for 1 year of activity to try and identify an area whereby we could set up a governance arrangement. It's almost it's almost entirely focused on getting the partnership established and what the governance would be, rather than technically delivering an actual framework. So the concept behind the land use partnership is really good, and it probably reflects on a number of the different points that we made across committee today, because what it would in theory do was bring up some of these tensions and pressures around land use management, and who makes the decisions and where does the power lie. So in theory, the concept is really good. I think getting there is going to take a bit longer. So the pilot is available for this year only. It's just to establish a partnership and to look at the governance arrangements around that. The one thing that's disappointing is Scottish Government have agreed at this point that no money will be challenged through those partnerships, which if you're a farmer or if you represent the NFU probably means you're not going to kill yourself to engage in that partnership. So all the various pilots have already flagged up at this point in time that they think that that's really a mistake, and that Scottish Government should look at that if we want to get wide engagements and key partners sitting around the table. So that's as much probably, Angela, as I can say at this point. It's probably why you're not seeing a huge amount of movement on it, because it is very much kind of very early stage talking shop, if I'm being completely frank about it. Yeah.
Thanks, Nicole. Katie, do you have anything to come back on what's been said by the last couple of speakers?
Perfect, thank you, Trish. So just coming back to Councillor Loudon, so obviously this is such a great opportunity, our transition to net zero, and I think that's definitely the way we want to look at it. It's a way in which we can strengthen our local supply chains and just really help build on the good progress that is going on in Highland. We have such an opportunity, as you say, and it is building on that. And so absolutely, completely agree with you there. In terms of the Councillor Fraser with the divestment, obviously we're under increasing pressure from public to divest. And I think that's where I can leave it there, and hopefully it will sort of pick up at other committees and we'll be able to progress with something. And then coming to Angela, in terms of the participatory funding, yes, that's definitely something that needs to be developed, and it's something that I need to look into and speak with some of the representatives that have come together for the Just Transition Commission and take their view of it and how it's going to work well within the Highlands region. In terms of the 20-minute neighbourhoods, I think there's some thinking that we need to interpret the 20-minute concept in a rural and island concept. So perhaps 20-minute rural development hubs and sort of like electric cars, bikes, safe walking, and high-speed networks across bigger geographies. So that's definitely something that can be developed. And in terms of the education side as well, as I said, I'm working with some of the schools to embed this sort of energy efficiency side of things. And through my work with the Riverness Hydro, we've been working with Science Skills Academy, who obviously have a big influence within schools across Highland, and they're really embedding a lot of climate action within their curriculum. So definitely want to keep that partnership working and develop on that. So I hope that's answered some of your questions.
Thank you, Katie. I have one more speaker, but just on the 20-minute neighbourhoods, it was already spoken at by the planners that this will have to be adapted for Highland, because there's areas of Highland it's never going to work in. Councillor Boyd.
Catherine, Katie, you've just stolen my thunder. You've said most of the things I was going to say, so that's good. I just wanted to say your paper has stimulated a lot of ideas and a lot of thoughts and conversation today, so it's done the right thing. Don't be worried at all about that. I know there's some new ideas coming up, but that's great. We're having the conversation. One of the things that came out, that was stimulated was, and I don't know exactly who said it, but this idea that we're not doing it to people, we're going to be doing it for the communities, and that's really important. Another thing that sticks in my mind right up top there, I'm thinking about the clearances. I don't know why, because it's a long way behind us. But I mean, it is not just sheep, and it's not trees. It's not just trees. And I'd like to just put this idea in your head as well. It's not just about tourism either. There's just one word that I'll say. That's not usual for me. I usually talk far too much, but diversification is one of the ways forward. We've talked a lot about opportunity, and there is a lot of opportunity. And along the way, we can sort out some of the other problems, as Councillor Loudon has said. We've got lots of space. We've got really skilled people, and we can diversify into the future. Anyway, I just wanted to thank you for your paper, Catherine, Katie. I found it stimulating. Thank you.
Yeah, well said, Bill. It's diversification is going to be very important for Highland, and there's a lot in what we're going to do for climate change that's going to help us along that way. Katie, do you want to have the last word on this before we finish up?
Yes, I just want to thank Bill for your kind of words. That's what this paper is all about. It's about stimulating that discussion and just putting on the table and how this is a real opportunity for Highlands. And obviously all the points that have been raised today, I will definitely go away, have a look. And obviously, as I'm new within the job, I'm still learning. So it's really good to sort of have your opinions and sort of share your views. So thank you very much. And also thank you very much, Emma, for coming in and helping me on the food side of things.
Thank you, Katie. Well done. You've done well for first attendance at this, but we're not scary really at all. Well, members, that's us come to end. If we just note the contents of the report, we've had a good discussion on it, and onwards and upwards, as they say. So thank you all for your attendance this morning, and that's us finished the meeting. Thank you.